This is On the Line, and I'm Eric Felton. With the cost of oil soaring, high gasoline prices have become a prominent issue in this year's presidential election in the United States. But the impact of rising energy prices affects far more than just domestic U.S. politics. The influence of oil and gas-producing nations such as Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Venezuela is growing regionally and even globally as they become wealthier. And nations dependent on foreign energy supplies to fuel rapid development, such as China, are devoting much of their diplomatic efforts to securing future sources of oil. How are rising energy prices affecting the world's economic balance of power? And what will the geopolitical fallout be of nations' efforts to gain energy security? I'll ask my guests. James Robbins, Director of the Intelligence Center at Trinity Washington University. And joining us by phone from California, Michael Ross, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of California, Los Angeles. Welcome. Thanks for joining us
Thank you.
today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Jim, let me start by asking you, what is energy security? Is this some achievable thing? It's a phrase that gets tossed around a lot in U.S. policy circles looking for energy security.
It could be defined in terms of the U.S. having energy self-sufficiency, that kind of thing. The United States is the largest energy user per capita in the world and is also a major energy producer. Nevertheless, the U.S. has to import large amounts of its energy, and the national economy is completely dependent on that. So some would look upon energy security as having the ability to enable access to whatever energy needs are out there so that the economy can continue to grow and prosper. And as energy costs rise, gross national product is affected negatively, and the U.S. becomes less secure. So one could even just say, in terms of the economics of energy, having less access as more other countries compete for the same limited resources, raising those costs, and then making the U.S. Less able to grow.
Well, Michael Ross, what's your sense? Is the U.S. Energy insecure at this point?
Well, I think Jim's definition is a good one. And we indeed are energy insecure in that we're highly dependent on imports in order to keep our economy going. So that makes the United States vulnerable to disruptions in other countries. And we face a second kind of energy insecurity in that a lot of the oil-rich regions and countries are cauldrons of unrest, are sites of civil war or upheaval of one kind or another. And that creates a kind of global energy insecurity, and that affects us as well.
Jim Robbins, what's your sense of that, of the insecurity of the nations developing oil? How big a risk is that to the global economy and to the U.S.?
That's a very important factor, both in terms of countries that produce energy that are domestically unstable, liable to things like civil conflict, that kind of thing that can disrupt energy, and those countries that benefit from increasing energy prices, which allow them to pursue policies which the United States would rather they not pursue. For example, Iran has benefited a great deal from the increase in energy prices, and this allows them to underwrite their nuclear program, whether it's for peaceful uses or for non-peaceful uses. It's something the United States would rather not see. And if Iran were not benefiting from the oil windfall, they probably would not be able to pursue that kind of policy. Also, the Middle East in general, an area in which there are aspects of hostile ideologies, the United States, the increase in Islamic terrorism can probably be related to energy-based resources that are going to the terrorists, not directly from states as state supporters, but indirectly through other means. So that also presents a challenge to us that's essentially energy-based.
Michael Ross, is there anything the U.S. can do about those kinds of problems? I mean, the U.S. has been with Iran trying to pursue a strategy of sanctions, economic sanctions against Iran, except you have an effort at economic sanctions at the same time when the oil wealth would seem to be counteracting whatever economic impact there might be from those sanctions.
That's right. Well, there's a couple of different strategy options. One, as you suggested, is to try to use trade embargoes to isolate oil-producing countries that are problems for the United States. And as in the case of Iran, but also in countries like that are oil and gas exporters like Sudan and Myanmar, these kinds of sanctions don't work very well. The world is so desperate for new energy supplies that it's very hard to put enforceable sanctions on these countries. Even the sanctions against Saddam Hussein in the 1990s in Iraq didn't work very well. An alternative strategy, one that personally I think would work better, is for the United States to significantly reduce its dependence on foreign energy sources, to reduce our use of petroleum and hence make us less susceptible to these disruptions and less vulnerable to conflicts around the world.
Let's talk first a little bit about the first issue that Michael Ross raises, which is the countries like Sudan, Burma, Myanmar, and the effect that the oil in those countries has. We've seen lots of efforts trying to get China to take a stronger hand both with Burma and with Sudan over the genocide in Darfur. And lots of analysts have said, well, China's not interested in doing that because they need the oil that they're getting from those countries.
That's true. China has pursued, I would say, a realist foreign policy in this regard. They're interested in energy. They're not interested in other things. We may be interested in them, but that doesn't mean that they are. They've given military support to both countries, so it is unlikely that they're going to take a human rights stand when they really need to have that energy coming to them. And I must say the United States has adopted similar policies over the years, although today we're more balanced in the other direction. I think that to the extent that the Chinese want to invest their resources in areas that are unstable, they're going to find that in the long term this is probably not a good idea. But they seem to be so desperate for energy now that they're willing to make those compromises, and the rest of the market seems to be saturated. So they're going to look into these kind of nooks and crannies and try to find those places, but I don't think in the long term it's going to help them.